Sometimes life gives you another shot when you're not looking for it. Sometimes one kind act can flip everything you thought you knew about yourself. Luke Carver had been living alone in the Montana mountains for 15 years. He came to town that night to grab some supplies, not thinking he'd find a bride left all alone on the church steps. Emma Galloway was standing there in her wedding dress, with the whole town staring at her embarrassment. Her groom had taken off with her cash. Luke didn't even think twice before stepping up. "I don't recall ladies being this pretty," he said softly. Those words changed their lives forever. Right there, as the sun went down, this mountain guy offered something nobody saw coming: his name, his protection, and his heart. What happened next blew the town's mind. But could two hurt people really make something strong together? Before we dive back in, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story hits you in the feels, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something super cool saved for you. The wind smelled like pine trees and snow coming down from the high mountains as Luke Carver led his pack mule through the skinny streets of Cedar Falls. It had been 15 years since he'd walked around buildings so close that neighbors could hear each other talk through thin walls. It had been 15 years since he had to watch his manners or talk quietly to be polite. The Montana land had a way of changing a guy. The mountains didn't care about your past, your mess-ups, or your regrets. They just asked you to be tough enough to make it through another day, smart enough to understand the weather, and humble enough to respect the wild that could end you if you weren't careful. Luke had learned those lessons well, and they'd turned him into someone tougher and more independent than the young guy who'd left the world behind years ago. His trapping knife hung on his belt, its leather handle smooth from tons of use. That knife had skinned more animal hides than he could count, built shelters from fallen trees, and protected him from bears and wolves. It was a tool that showed. He knew how to survive, a guy who only relied on his own skills and the wild's tough kindness. But now, as the evening shadows stretched across the dusty main street, Luke came face to face with something the mountains never taught him how to deal with. Emma Galloway stood on the steps of the little white church, looking like she belonged in a different world. Her wedding dress, even though it was worn from the long trip west, still glowed in the fading light with a fancy look that didn't fit this rough town. The ivory lace showed careful work, like it came from a place where pretty things mattered as much as useful ones. Her dark hair was tucked under a delicate veil that moved in the evening breeze, and her brown eyes showed both pride and heartbreak. That hit Luke like a punch. She was 30 years old, but the day's shame added shadows under her eyes that made her look older. Emma had gone to school back in Massachusetts, where her dad ran a small but decent business making ladies' gloves. She could read Latin and speak French, had taught in a one-room schoolhouse, and could play the piano well enough to lead the church choir on Sundays. None of that seemed to matter now, standing abandoned in her wedding dress, while the folks of Cedar Falls whispered about her like buzzards circling something dead. The teaching certificate in her small travel bag stood for everything she'd once thought was important: education, being on her own, supporting herself with her own work. But the trip west had cost more than she expected, and her groom running off with her dowry left her stuck with barely enough money for a week's food. All her careful plans, all her hopes for a fresh start, had fallen apart in just a few hours. Luke had ridden down from his mountain cabin that morning just to trade furs for winter supplies. Cedar Falls was his link to the outside world, a place he visited 3 or 4 times a year when he had to. The town saw him as a guy who brought good furs and fresh meat, kept his promises and paid his bills, but also someone who clearly liked mountains better than people. The townsfolk respected Luke's skills and honesty, but they weren't sure what to think of him. He was polite when doing business, but he listened more than he talked, which made people uneasy. His gray eyes seemed to see too much, and his rough hands told of a life far from church parties and town meetings. Martha Henderson, the banker's wife, had told everyone who'd listen that Luke Carver was probably hiding from something. A guy didn't spend 15 years alone in the mountains unless he had a reason to stay away from people. But whatever secrets he might have, he'd never cause trouble in town, and his money was always good. Young Tom Mitchell, just out of preacher school, Wasn't sure about doing the wedding when Emma's groom didn't show up. It wasn't normal, maybe even a scandal, and definitely not the proper kind of event he'd been trained for. But leaving a good woman stuck and helpless seemed even less right. So he stood there in his black coat, prayer book in hand, waiting for someone to figure out what to do. The crowd that gathered seemed more interested in the gossip than in helping. Mrs. Henderson whispered to Mrs. Cooper about how improper it all was. Old Pete Jameson grumbled that mail-order marriages never ended well and that this was what happened when women got too bold. Even the kids felt the tension, hiding behind their moms' skirts and staring at the pretty lady in the fancy dress who looked like she might cry. Emma felt their stares like heavy weights on her shoulders. The shame burned her cheeks as she realized her new life was falling apart before it even started. She'd spent her last good option on the trip west, cut ties back home, and now depended on the kindness of strangers in a town that seemed more ready to judge than help. That's when Luke stepped forward, his boots loud on the wooden steps, his presence somehow calming in a world that had turned shaky. He moved with the quiet sureness of a guy used to making his own choices without asking committees or caring about opinions. His voice, when he spoke, had the rough edge of someone who'd been alone a long time, but also a softness that surprised everyone there. "I don't recall ladies being this pretty," he said, and the words landed in the quiet, evening like pebbles in a still pond. They weren't fancy or rehearsed. Luke wasn't a guy for big speeches, but his words had a realness that cut through all the whispers and awkward shuffling. Emma looked up at him then, really looked, and saw something in his weathered face that gave her hope. Here was a guy who knew what it felt like to be alone, who saw the brave choice she'd made to travel across the country for a fresh start. His gray eyes didn't judge her or figure out what she might cost him or how she'd mess up his simple life. "Ma'am," Luke went on, taking off his worn hat and running his fingers through hair that had grown too long in the mountains. "I know this isn't what you planned, and I'm not great with fancy talk or proper dating, but if you're okay with it, I'd be proud to give you my name and whatever protection I can offer." His proposal was as straightforward as if he were talking about the weather or the price of furs. No big gestures, no promises of love forever, just a real solution from a guy who knew life sometimes needed fast choices and the guts to act on them. Young Tom blinked in shock, his prayer book almost slipping from his hands. This wasn't how weddings were supposed to go. No announcements, no proper dating, no family talks. But watching a good woman face ruin seemed worse than bending some rules. Emma felt every eye on her as she thought about Luke's offer. Here was a guy she'd never talked to, never even seen before this moment, offering to tie his life to hers just because it was the decent thing to do. Her practical side listed the risks. He could be anyone, could have any kind of past or plans. But something in his steady look and careful voice told her that whatever challenges came, they'd be honest ones. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely loud enough over the evening wind. "Yes, I will." The ceremony was quick and clumsy, with the townsfolk as unwilling witnesses to a marriage nobody really got. Luke's answers were clear and strong, while Emma's voice shook just a little as she repeated vows to a guy whose full name she'd only just learned. As the preacher said they were husband and wife, Luke offered Emma his arm with the same polite care he'd give any lady, and together they faced the unknown future like an uncharted path into the wild. Now standing in the fading light with his new wife beside him, Luke wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Marriage was never part of his plan, especially not to a smart Eastern lady who probably wanted things a mountain guy could never give. But seeing Emma's quiet strength despite the town's gossip, he felt sure he'd made the right call, even if he had no clue how to make it work. The crowd started to leave as the excitement faded, leaving Luke and Emma to deal with the real questions their quick decision had raised. Where would they live? How would they handle the awkwardness of a marriage between strangers? And most importantly, how would they get through their first night as husband and wife without dying of embarrassment? Luke cleared his throat and gave Emma his most respectful nod. "Ma'am, Emma, I've got a room at the boarding house for tonight. I'll arrange for separate rooms. Tomorrow, if you're okay with it, I'd like to show you my place up in the mountains. It's not fancy by city standards, but it's solid shelter, with good water and wood for whatever fixes we might need. Emma looked up at this unexpected husband, noticing his weathered face and the careful way he stood, like he was afraid he might offend her. "Mr. Carver," she said softly, "I know this isn't what either of us planned, but I'm thankful for your kindness, and I'll do my best to be a good wife to you, whatever that means, in this situation." Luke felt a weight lift off his chest at her words. Whatever happened next, at least they could be honest with each other. That was more than many marriages started with, and it would have to do. The morning sun shone through the dusty windows of Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house as Emma stared at her teaching certificate, its paper a bit yellowed from the trip west. The fancy writing about her skills seemed to laugh at her new life. What good was knowing Latin verbs when she was married to a stranger and facing a life in the wild? Luke had kept his promise about separate rooms, getting the boarding house's only spare room for Emma while he slept on a bedroll in the stable. She'd barely slept, hearing the strange sounds of the frontier town and wondering what the morning would bring. Through her small window she could see him now, carefully checking his pack mule's harness with the focus of a guy who knew survival depended on little details. The wedding from the night before felt like it happened to someone else. Young. Reverend Mitchell had fumbled through the short service, sounding stronger only when he got to the familiar part about pronouncing them man and wife. Luke's answers had been steady, while Emma had spoken vows to a guy whose rough hands told stories she couldn't read. Mrs. Pemberton, a widow who'd run the boarding house for 15 years, brought breakfast of biscuits and coffee with the quick efficiency of someone who'd seen plenty of frontier drama and wasn't impressed. "Your husband seems like a good guy," she said as Emma picked at her food. "Keeps to himself, pays his bills, never makes trouble. That's more than some can say." The townsfolk who saw their quick wedding had spread the story fast. Emma could hear their whispers from her window, guessing about Luke's reasons, judging her desperation, and betting on how long their odd marriage would last. Martha Henderson's voice carried clearly in the morning air as she talked about the scandal with anyone who'd listen. "A proper lady doesn't marry a stranger," Mrs. Henderson said to her neighbor. "Mark my words, nothing good will come of this. That mountain guy probably saw a chance and took it, and well, what does that say about her accepting a proposal like that?" Emma folded her teaching certificate and tucked it carefully into her travel bag with the few things that made up her whole life. Her mom's silver locket, a few favorite books, the blue wool dress she'd saved for special days. Such small treasures for a 30-year-old woman who'd once pictured a different future. Luke showed up at her door right at 8:00, hat in hand and pack mule ready for the trip. He'd cleaned up as much as the frontier allowed, but you couldn't hide that he belonged to the wild, not civilization. His worn coat told of long seasons in the mountains, and his boots showed miles of rough ground. "Good morning, Mrs. Carver," he said, the new name sounding awkward between them. "If you're ready, we can head up to my place. It's a long ride, but the mule's steady and the weather looks good." Mrs. Carver. Emma tried the name in her head and found it strange, but not bad. She'd been Miss Galloway, the school teacher, for so long that taking her husband's name felt like stepping into a whole new person. Maybe that wasn't so bad, considering how her old life had fallen apart. "I'm ready, Mr. Carver," she said, picking up her bag and following him down the narrow stairs. The boarding house's other guests, a traveling merchant and an old prospector, watched them leave with open curiosity. Luke helped her onto the mule with gentle care, his hands respectful as he adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs. Emma hadn't ridden much and definitely not in a wedding dress, but she was determined not to complain. This guy had saved her from ruin out of pure kindness. The least she could do was match his practical attitude. As they rode through Cedar Falls' main street, Emma felt the stare of every window and doorway. The town's judgment followed them, like a heavy cloud, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let their whispers get to her. Let them talk, she thought. She'd made her choice and would face whatever came next with pride. The trail to the mountains started easy, winding through foothills covered in golden grass and scattered pine trees. Luke rode beside her, on his strong horse, sometimes pointing out landmarks or sharing quiet thoughts about the land they were passing through. His voice had the rhythm of someone used to being alone, like he wasn't used to talking much but was trying for her sake. "That peak there," he said, pointing to a far-off mountain. "That's where I trap most in winter. Good shelter. In the valleys, and animals follow the same paths when the snow gets deep." Emma nodded, though the wild around them felt huge and scary. She'd grown up in Massachusetts' mill towns, where the wildest nature was a neat city park. This world of endless mountains and sky felt like stepping into a different planet. As they climbed higher, Luke started to relax. The stiffness he had around townsfolk faded, replaced by something more natural and confident. Out here he moved with the ease of someone who belonged, reading the land and weather like it was second nature. "Been living up here 15 years, he said during a break, by a clear mountain stream. Came up as a young guy with more anger than sense. Thought I'd stay a season or two and move on. But the mountains have a way of keeping you if you let them." Emma looked at his weathered face, seeing the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into sun and snow. "What made you come here?" she asked, then wished she hadn't when she saw him tense up. "Just needed to get away from people for a while," he said carefully. "Sometimes a guy has to find his own path, away from what others expect or think." There was old pain in his voice, buried deep, but Emma was smart enough not to push. Whatever brought Luke to the mountains was his story to tell when he was ready, if ever. She'd learned patience teaching kids, and she figured patience would be key to understanding her new husband. As evening came, they set up camp in a cozy grove by another stream. Luke's setup was quick and smooth, tying up the animals, gathering firewood, and making a simple but sturdy shelter with his bedroll and a piece of canvas. Emma watched him work, impressed by the wisdom he'd gained from years of surviving on his own. "I'll sleep by the fire," Luke said, handing her a cup of coffee brewed over the flames. "You take the shelter. It's not fancy, but it'll keep the dew off." Emma took the coffee, surprised at how good it tasted after the long day of riding. "Mr. Carver?" she started, then stopped, unsure how to say what she was thinking. "Just Luke, if that's okay," he said quietly. "We're married now, even if it's not a normal situation. Seems like we should use first names." "Luke," she said, trying it out. "I know this is weird for both of us. I know this isn't a regular marriage, and I don't want you to feel stuck with—" Luke cut her off gently. "You don't need to worry about that. I may not have fancy manners, but I know how to treat a lady right. We'll take this one day at a time, see how we get along. No pressure, just kindness." That night, as Emma lay in the little shelter, listening to the strange sounds of the wild, she thought about the crazy turn her life had taken. Just 24 hours ago, she'd been Emma Galloway, the abandoned bride everyone pitied. Now she was Emma Carver, wife to a mountain man, heading for a life she couldn't even imagine. The next morning brought news that shook their calm. A rider from town found them as they were packing up camp, his horse sweaty from a hard ride. "Luke Carver!" the man shouted. "You need to know. The guy who was supposed to marry this lady, he's asking about you in the saloons. Says he's coming back with friends to settle things. Thought you should know." Luke's face turned hard as stone as he took in the news. Their peaceful mountain trip had just gotten way more dangerous. The news of her old groom's threats hung heavy as Luke led Emma higher into the mountains. The messenger had gone back to town, but his warning stuck with them, seen in Luke's tense shoulders and the way his eyes scanned the trail ahead. "What kind of guy was he?" Luke asked as they climbed a steep part of the path. "The guy who was supposed to marry you?" Emma gripped the mule's reins tighter, thinking of Roland Hutchins with embarrassment and growing anger. "His name was Roland Hutchins. He wrote to me for 6 months, made himself sound like a successful businessman wanting to start a ranch in Montana. His letters were polite, promising a good life for the right woman." Luke grunted, like he'd heard stories like that before. "What kind of business?" "He said he owned a freight company, moving goods between mining camps and towns. Said he needed a wife with education to help him make social connections." Emma's voice showed her bitterness. "It wasn't until I got to Cedar Falls that I found out the truth. He was just a gambler and a con man, living off borrowed money he never planned to pay back." They reached a ridge, and Luke pointed to a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. "There," he said with quiet pride. "Home." Emma's first look at Luke's mountain place left her speechless. She'd expected a rough shack, maybe just a lean-to. Instead, she saw the stone foundation of what used to be a big house. The carefully placed stones showed skilled work, but the cabin itself was gone. Only the foundation and a huge stone chimney stood. "Fire took the cabin 3 years ago," Luke explained, helping her off the mule. "Lightning hit during a dry spell. Lost everything except what was in the root cellar and the stonework. Been meaning to rebuild, but one guy working alone doesn't get far with trapping and hunting to do." Emma walked among the foundation stones, touching the carefully fitted rocks. The size suggested a real house, at least 3 rooms, with a proper fireplace and space for a kitchen. Someone had planned this as a real home, not a temporary shelter. "You built this yourself?" she asked, noticing the quality of the stonework. Luke nodded, a bit of pride in his voice. "Took 4 summers to get the foundation right. Had to haul most of these stones from the creek, fit each one by hand. The cabin was pine logs, sealed tight against the weather. It was a good home while it lasted." Emma could imagine it as it was, a solid, cozy house where a guy could live with pride. Seeing it in ruins touched her heart in a way she didn't expect. "We could rebuild it," she said without thinking, then caught herself. "I mean, if you think, I don't know much about building, but I'm willing to learn." Luke looked at her for a long moment, something she couldn't read in his gray eyes. "You'd want to live up here? It's tough country, Emma. Winter snows can trap you for months. Nearest neighbor is 2 days' ride. When something breaks, you fix it yourself or go without." Emma looked around the clearing, taking in the tall pines, distant peaks, and the clear stream bubbling by. The quiet was deep but alive, with wind in the pines and a hawk calling far off. After the harsh judgment of Cedar Falls, the wild felt like a safe place. "Where would we live while rebuilding?" she asked practically. Luke pointed to a structure she hadn't seen, a well-made lean-to against the stone chimney, hidden among the trees. "Built that for shelter after the fire. It's not much, but it's weatherproof and has room for the basics." Emma checked out the lean-to, impressed by Luke's clever design. It was small but smart, with a slanted roof for rain and snow, good drainage and proper airflow. A simple but solid place that showed a guy who knew how to live well with what he had. "It's more than I had yesterday," she said quietly, "and more honest than anything Roland Hutchins ever promised." Luke started unloading the mule with smooth efficiency, his movements careful and purposeful. Emma watched him work, noticing how he handled each item with care, organizing supplies like they were part of a bigger plan for surviving in the mountains. "I'm not big on company," Luke admitted as he stored their stuff in the lean-to. 15 years alone makes a guy set in his ways. I keep regular hours, don't talk much unless it's needed, and like things neat and orderly. That might take getting used to." Emma rolled up her sleeves and helped arrange supplies, surprised to enjoy the practical work. "I taught school for 8 years, Luke. Order and routine don't scare me. What might be tricky is learning to live in the wild without getting us both killed by my mistakes." Luke paused, looking at her with those sharp gray eyes. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect? Most city ladies would be crying by now or begging to go back to town." Emma thought about that as she folded her clothes neatly. "Most city ladies probably have somewhere to go back to. I don't. This is my life now, Luke, and I'm going to make it work. If that means learning to be a mountain woman, that's what I'll do." Just then, a rustle in the nearby bushes announced a black bear checking out their camp. Emma froze, her heart pounding, but Luke moved calmly. "Stand still," he said quietly, grabbing his rifle always close by. "He's just curious about new smells. Won't bother us if we don't bother him." The bear stepped out from the trees, huge and powerful. Emma had never seen a wild bear before, and the reality of sharing the wild with such animals hit her hard. This wasn't a storybook or a picture in a book. This was real danger, needing real skills she didn't have. Luke stood still, rifle ready but not threatening, watching the bear with the calm of someone who understood wild animals. After a tense few minutes, the bear decided they weren't worth checking out and wandered off. First lesson in mountain: Living, Luke said, lowering his rifle. Respect the wildlife, but don't be scared. Fear makes you do dumb things that get you killed. Emma realized her hands were shaking. How do you live with that kind of danger every day? Same way you lived with city dangers back east, Luke said plainly. You learn the rules, stay alert, and don't take stupid risks. Most wild animals want nothing to do with people. It's the ones that break that rule you watch out for. As evening settled over their mountain clearing, Emma helped Luke make their first meal as husband and wife. The work was simple but nice, gathering firewood, making coffee, sharing food that tasted better in the crisp mountain air. Tomorrow, Luke said by the fire, I'll start teaching you what you need to survive up here. How to read the weather, move safely in bear country, find your way if you get lost. It's a lot, but you seem like a fast learner. Emma looked up at the stars through the pine branches, brighter than she'd ever seen in the gaslit streets of Massachusetts. I won't let you down, Luke. I promise. But even as she said it, she wondered what other challenges waited in this beautiful, dangerous place, and whether a mountain man and a city teacher could really build a life together. Emma's recipe book sat open on the rough wooden table Luke had made from pine logs, its pages filled with neat handwriting that felt out of place in the wild. Her mom's apple cake recipe called for stuff like fine flour, sugar, butter, and vanilla, things as rare as gold in the Montana mountains. Making do with what you've got is the first rule of mountain cooking, Luke said, watching Emma frown at her recipes. Sugar comes from maple trees if you know how to tap them. Flour can be stretched with ground acorns or pine nuts. Butter's fancy, but bear fat works for most things. Emma looked up from her book, determined but unsure. My mom would pass out if she knew I was thinking about cooking with bear fat. Your mom never had to make winter supplies last till spring, Luke said with a small grin. Mountain cooking is about staying fed and keeping food good, not making it look pretty. It had been 3 weeks since they got to the mountain clearing, and Emma was starting to see how different surviving in the wild was from just getting by. Every task needed skills she'd never used in the city, from keeping the fire going at night to knowing which wild plants were safe to eat. Luke was a patient teacher, showing her once and expecting her to remember. Emma found her mind getting sharper in ways school never demanded. Show me how to tap a maple tree, she said, closing the recipe book with a snap. If I'm going to live in the mountains, I might as well cook like a mountain woman. Luke's smile was the first real relaxed one she'd seen. Now you're talking sense. Come on. There's a good bunch of sugar maples by the creek. As they walked through the forest, Luke pointed out details, birds warning about weather, animal tracks, plants for food or medicine. Emma's world was growing bigger, beyond her old life, into something huge and connected. Tell me about your family back east, Luke said as they checked a maple tree. What made you answer a stranger's ad for a wife? Emma touched the tree's bark, thinking about how much to share. Luke had been clear about wanting privacy for his past, but she wanted to trust him with hers. My dad owned a small glove-making business in Lowell, she said carefully. We weren't rich, but we were okay. I taught school and lived at home, helping with my younger sister. Everything seemed steady. Luke made careful cuts in the maple bark, his movements precise. What changed? Dad made some bad investments trying to grow the business. When the bank called in his loans, we lost everything. The business, the house, even my sister's dowry. Dad died of a heart attack 6 months later. The shame broke him. Luke stopped working, looking at her with understanding. And your sister? She married her guy anyway. His family had money, so they didn't care about her missing dowry, but there wasn't room for a single sister in their new home. They made it clear I'd embarrassed their social status. Emma's voice showed bitterness she thought she'd let go. Margaret chose comfort over loyalty, leaving me to deal with our mess alone. So you headed west, Luke said, starting his work again. I answered a few ads, but Roland Hutchins seemed the best bet. His letters talked about building a real home and family. I thought I was choosing security. Emma laughed, but it wasn't happy. Instead, I just traded one fake dream for another. Luke put a wooden spout in the cut, setting a bucket to catch the dripping sap. Sometimes the worst thing turns out to be just what you needed. Emma looked at his weathered face, noticing how he avoided her eyes. Is that what happened to you? What brought you to the mountains? Luke stood, his face closing off. Just needed to get away from complications, he said shortly. Sometimes a guy has to choose between who he was and who he wants to be. That night, as they ate venison stew with wild herbs Luke taught her to find, Emma watched her husband with growing interest. He moved through the wild with easy grace, noticing signs she was just starting to see. But sometimes she caught him looking at her with something like longing, quickly hidden when he saw her notice. "Luke," she said carefully, "I need to ask something, and I want a straight answer." He looked up from his bowl, tiredness in his gray eyes. "Okay. Do you regret marrying me? I know it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, a kind act you didn't think through. Now that we're living together, building something, do you wish you could take it back?" Luke put down his spoon and looked at her in the firelight. "I've lived alone for 15 years, Emma. Made my own choices, answered to nobody. It's been a simple life, not always easy." Emma's heart sank, bracing for the rejection she'd feared since their wedding. "But these past 3 weeks," Luke went on, "watching you take on mountain life, tackling problems most city ladies would run from, it's changed me. Reminded me what it's like to have someone to protect, to share the work and worries with." He poked the fire, sending sparks into the dark sky. "I don't regret marrying you, Emma, but I need to know, do you regret saying yes? If this life's too hard or lonely, I'll take you back to town, make sure you're okay." Emma thought about everything she'd learned, lost and gained in the past month. The woman who got off the stage in Cedar Falls felt like a stranger now, naive, dependent, shaped by others' expectations. "I don't regret it," she said finally. "I'm not the same person who answered Roland Hutchins' ad. That woman wanted someone to take care of her, give her security. But the woman I'm becoming wants to be a partner, not a burden. She wants to build something real with a man who sees her as equal." Luke's smile was slow and real, making Emma's breath catch. "Then I guess we're both getting more than we expected." As they cleaned up after dinner, working together smoothly, Emma felt something shift. The careful politeness was turning into something warmer, stronger. They were becoming real partners, tied not just by a wedding but by shared work and respect. The mountain night settled around them, vast and starry, holding their small firelight like a promise of home. Emma found letters hidden under a loose floorboard in what used to be the cabin's main room, wrapped in oiled leather to keep them safe from dampness and time. She found them by accident while looking for a flat stone to grind acorn flour. The board moved under her weight, showing a small hiding spot Luke had clearly forgotten about since the fire 3 years ago. Her first thought was to put the board back and act like she'd seen nothing. Privacy was important in their growing bond, and Luke had made it clear his past was off limits. But as she knelt in the ruins of his old home, Emma saw fancy handwriting on nice paper, letters from a world far from the mountains. The top letter was addressed to Lucas Carver, Esquire, in neat script that showed a lot of education. Against her better judgment, Emma read the first few lines. "My dearest Lucas, your father's law practice is still doing well without you, though he worries more each year that you won't come back to Boston. The partnership he offered is still open, and your trust fund keeps growing, as you asked, in your last letter." Emma quickly put the letters back, her mind spinning. Lucas Carver wasn't just a mountain man looking for peace. He was someone with schooling, family ties, and money he'd chosen to leave behind. The rough trapper who saved her from shame was also a guy who'd walked away from a life most people could only dream of. That evening, as they made dinner together, Emma looked at Luke differently. Now that she knew what to look for, she saw hints of his educated past in how he spoke, the occasional fancy word that slipped out, the ease with which he talked about her own schooling and teaching. "You're quiet tonight," Luke said, glancing up from the rabbit he was skinning with practiced skill. "Something bothering you?" Emma hesitated, torn between honesty and respecting his privacy. Their bond was built on giving each other space, but the letters raised questions about their future. "I've been thinking about winter prep," she said, picking a safer topic. "You said we need enough meat for months. How do we know what's enough?" Luke nodded, liking her. "Practical question. Experience, mostly. A good hunter learns to guess based on weather, animal habits, and storage space. It's not exact, but 15 years of mountain winters teaches you to plan for the worst. As he spoke, Emma noticed again how clearly he explained things, using words that showed he'd read a lot and had a good education. How had a guy with legal training and family money ended up choosing a hard life in the Montana wild? Their talk was cut off by the sound of horses coming up the trail, multiple riders moving carefully. Luke went still, his hand automatically reaching for his rifle. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, standing with smooth confidence. "Could be anyone, but strangers don't usually come this way without a reason." 3 men rode out of the trees as the sun set, their horses tired from the climb. Emma recognized the leader, Tom Bradley, Cedar Falls' unofficial mayor and owner of the biggest store. The other 2 were strangers, dressed in rough clothes like men used to hard work and harder lives. "Luke Carver," Bradley called, raising his hand but staying back. "Sorry to barge in, but we've got a problem in town that needs your skills." Luke stayed cautious but nodded politely. "Evening, Tom. What kind of problem?" "A pack of wolves is hitting ranches south of town," Bradley said. "Took 6 cows last week and they're getting bold. Came right up to the Morrison place in daylight. We tried tracking them, but they're too smart for us." Emma watched Luke's face, seeing how he sized up the men and their horses, always checking for threats. "Wolves don't usually go for cattle unless they're desperate," Luke said thoughtfully. "Something's pushing them out of their normal spots. Maybe no prey or people moving into their land. Whatever the reason," Bradley said. "Folks are scared. The Morrison kids can't even play outside anymore. We'll pay well for someone to track these wolves and fix the problem." Luke glanced at Emma, and she saw the struggle in his gray eyes. He'd spent 15 years avoiding other people's problems, but his instinct to protect was clear when it came to families and kids. "How much are we talking?" Emma asked, surprising herself by speaking up. All 3 men turned to her, like they'd forgotten she was there. $200, Bradley said after a pause. Cash when the wolf problem's solved. Emma felt Luke's surprise at her jumping in, but she kept going. "And how long would it take?" "Hard to say," one of the other men said. "Could be a few days, maybe weeks, depending on how clever these wolves are and how far we have to track them." Luke was still watching Emma, trying to figure out why she cared. She gave him a look, hoping he'd trust her, even if she couldn't. "Explain right then." "We'll think it over," Luke said finally. "Give us tonight to talk, and I'll ride to town tomorrow with an answer." After the men left, Emma and Luke sat by their fire in quiet thought. The $200 was more money than most mountain families saw in years, enough for building supplies, winter food, even some small comforts. "You want me to take this job?" Luke asked finally. "I think you should think about it," Emma said. "Not just for the money, though that's nice, but because you're the kind of guy who helps people in need. That's why you married me, after all." Luke poked at the fire, sparks flying up. "Tracking wolves isn't like helping an abandoned bride. It's dangerous, and if something happened to me, you'd be stuck up here alone." Emma thought about the letters under the floorboard, about the family and money Luke had left behind. But she also thought about the man he'd become, independent, skilled, and kind, in ways that had nothing to do with wealth or status. "Then we'll make sure nothing happens to you," she said firmly. "I've gotten pretty fond of my mountain man, husband, and I'm not ready to lose him." Luke's smile was worth the risk of showing her feelings. Whatever secrets he had, whatever choices brought him here, Emma knew her future was tied to his in ways deeper than their quick wedding. The wolf hunt would test more than Luke's tracking skills. It would test if their partnership could handle what was coming. The fever hit without warning on the 3rd day after Luke went to town to take the wolf hunting job. Emma woke up shivering, even though it was a warm fall morning, her body aching like she'd been run over. By noon, she could barely stand without the world spinning. The simple silver ring Luke had made from ore caught the firelight as her shaking fingers gripped the table's edge. That ring was more than a sign of their quick marriage. It was a reminder of a guy who'd shown his worth through actions, not words. Now, with Luke away hunting wolves and Emma burning with fever in their mountain cabin, that ring felt like her only link to safety. She'd been alone for 3 days, doing okay until the sickness hit. Luke had left clear instructions. Keep the fire going, secure food from bears, use the rifle if needed. But he hadn't planned for illness, and Emma realized she was facing something her limited mountain skills couldn't handle. The fever got worse through the afternoon, bringing weakness that made even simple tasks nearly impossible. Emma forced herself to drink water, knowing drying out could kill her, but keeping it down was hard. Every joint ached, and weird dreams crept into her mind, even when she was awake. By evening, she was so out of it she thought she heard Luke calling her name from the forest. The dream was so real she stood and called back, "Luke, I'm here," before collapsing as reality hit. He was miles away, tracking wolves with townsfolk. He wouldn't be back for days, maybe weeks. The night brought scary dreams and moments of half-awareness, where Emma wasn't sure if the sounds were real or in her head. Mountain cats screamed fair off, or maybe they were just fever dreams. Fire died down and she was too weak to add wood, leaving the shelter cold and dark. At dawn, Emma was barely awake, her lips cracked, her skin burning. She'd crawled near the dying fire for its faint warmth, but moving more was impossible. Part of her knew she was in real danger. Mountain fever had killed stronger people, and she was alone. Then she heard real horses coming, not fever dreams, and men's voices getting closer, boots on the wooden platform Luke had built. "Mrs. Carver, Emma," called Doc Peterson from Cedar Falls, though Emma couldn't figure out why he'd be at their camp. "She's in here, Doc," said Tom Bradley, the guy who hired Luke for the wolf hunt. "Luke sent word she wasn't feeling good when he left, thought we should check." Emma tried to answer, but only managed a weak croak. Strong hands lifted her gently, and she looked up into the doctor's weathered face. "Mountain fever, no doubt," Doc Peterson said, touching her hot forehead. "She's dried out and burning up bad. Good thing Luke sent that message, or we might have been too late." Through her fever, Emma caught bits of talk as the doctor worked to get water into her and cool her down with wet cloths. Luke had sent word through a passing trapper to check on her, even while hunting wolves far away. The next few days blurred in a mix of fever dreams and slow recovery. Doc Peterson moved her to town for proper care, despite her weak protests about waiting for Luke. Mrs. Pemberton, the boarding house owner, was a skilled nurse who'd handled mountain fever before. "Your husband's real devoted to you," Mrs. Pemberton said as Emma got strong enough to eat solid food. "Most guys wouldn't stop important work to send for help." Emma touched her ring, still on her finger despite the fever. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Better than I expected." "Better than most folks in town thought," Mrs. Pemberton agreed. "There's been talk about your quick marriage. Some thought he was taking advantage. Others thought you were after his savings. But a guy who stops a job to make sure his wife's okay, that's not just a deal. That's love." Love. Emma thought about the word as she got stronger. She'd gone into their marriage expecting just respect and teamwork. But watching Luke's patient teaching and quiet care, her feelings had grown into something she hadn't dared name. Luke came back to town 5 days later, his horse tired from hard riding, his face showing worry and sleepless nights. Emma was on the boarding house porch, still weak but recovering, when he rode up. He jumped off before his horse stopped and reached the porch in quick steps. "Emma," he said, his voice rough with relief. "Doc said the fever broke yesterday, but I had to see you." Emma stood carefully, still shaky but wanting to greet him properly. "You came back," she said, never doubting he would. Of course I came back." Luke's hands hovered near her shoulders, like he wanted to hug her but wasn't sure it was okay. "When I heard you were sick, nothing else mattered. Not the wolves, not the money, nothing. The job's done," Luke said shortly. "Tracked the wolves to their den, took care of the problem. Bradley has your money." He paused, looking at her with those sharp gray eyes. "Emma, I need to tell you something. These past few days, thinking I might lose you before we even had a chance." Emma stepped closer, putting her hand on his chest. "I know," she said softly. "I felt it too during the fever. The fear of leaving things unsaid, feelings not shared." Luke's arms wrapped around her carefully like she might break. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I didn't expect it, didn't plan it, But somewhere between that first night in town and now, you became everything I didn't know I needed." Emma leaned into his hug, feeling his strength and knowing they'd face whatever came together. "I love you too," she whispered. "My mountain man, my husband." Around them, Cedar Falls folks watched their real affection with reluctant approval. Maybe this odd marriage could work. Maybe love could grow in the strangest places between the unlikeliest people. But even as Emma felt safe in Luke's arms and the warmth of his love, she couldn't forget those hidden letters and the questions they raised about his past. Love was a start, but a strong marriage needed honesty, and Luke was still hiding things that could ruin everything they were building. The wanted poster came with the weekly mail to Cedar Falls, brought by a territorial marshal tracking leads across 3 states. Emma saw it first, nailed to the post outside the general store while Luke was inside settling the wolf hunt payment. Her blood ran cold as she read the bold words. Wanted, Lucas Carver, alias Luke Carrington. Robbery, grand theft, $500 reward. The description fit her husband perfectly. Height, weight, gray eyes, even the small scar on his left hand from a childhood accident he'd mentioned. But the name Luke Carrington hit her hardest. She'd seen it before in the fancy script on those hidden letters. Emma forced herself to read the whole poster, her horror growing. Lucas Carrington was wanted for bank robberies across Colorado and Wyoming from 1878 to 1882. The crimes took thousands of dollars, and though no one was killed, some bank workers got hurt. The poster said Carrington was dangerous and shouldn't be approached by regular folks. The man she'd married, the kind mountain guy who saved her from shame and cared for her through fever, was a wanted criminal with a big price on his head. Emma's hands shook as she tore the poster down, crumpling it against her chest like she could erase the words. Around her, Cedar Falls went on as usual. No one else had noticed the poster yet, but it was only a matter of time. Luke came out of the store with supplies, his face happy in a way she'd come to love. The wolf hunt had gone well, earning enough to start rebuilding their cabin before winter. They'd been planning their future, how many rooms, a proper kitchen, a warm and efficient layout. Now it was all falling apart. "Emma," Luke said, noticing her distress. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." Emma glanced around the busy street, checking who could hear. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Privately now." Luke's face sharpened with the wariness that never fully left him. He loaded their supplies onto the mule quickly, and they rode out of town in tense silence. Emma's mind swirled with questions, accusations, and a growing sense of betrayal, fighting her love for the man she thought she knew. Halfway back to their clearing, Emma finally spoke. "Lucas Carrington," she said, watching Luke's shoulders stiffen. "That's who you really are, isn't it?" Luke stopped his horse in the middle of the trail, his hands steady on the reins despite her bombshell. "Where did you hear that name?" Emma handed him the crumpled poster without a word. Luke studied it for a long moment, his face showing. "Nothing. I see," he said finally. "How long have you known?" "I found the letters under the floorboard 3 weeks ago," Emma admitted. "The ones from your family in Boston. But I didn't know about this until today." Luke folded the poster and tucked it into his coat. "We should get home before we talk about this. These mountains have ears, and some things are better said in private." The ride back felt endless. Emma's emotions swung between anger at his lies and fear for what this meant for their future. If Luke was a wanted criminal, their marriage was built on a lie, and his presence put her at risk of being called an accomplice. At their camp, Luke unloaded supplies and tended the animals before facing Emma's questions. She'd prepared herself for this confrontation, but seeing him do familiar tasks with the same careful skill made her heart ache with confusion. "The poster's true," Luke said straight out. "I robbed 6 banks between 1878 and 1882. Took about $12,000 total. Never killed anyone, but people got hurt." Emma sank onto the log they used as a bench, his blunt words hitting her hard. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" Luke sat across from her, his gray eyes steady but full of old pain. "I was young, angry, thought the world owed me for what I'd been through, thought I could take shortcuts without caring about the consequences." He looked into the distance, his voice like he was telling a story he'd gone over many times. My real name's Lucas Carrington. My dad's Jonathan Carrington, a big-shot lawyer in Boston. I was supposed to join his firm, marry well, live like a proper gentleman. Emma waited, sensing there was more than just rebelling against family. When I was 22, I fell in love with a girl named Catherine Morrison, Luke said. She was smart, beautiful, but not good enough for my family. Her dad was a blacksmith, and she worked as a seamstress to help her siblings. I asked her to marry me. Luke's hands clenched. My dad said he'd cut me off if I married her. No inheritance, no job, no place in Boston society. I was cocky, thought I could make it on my own, that love would be enough. Emma started to understand the pain that drove Luke to the mountains. But it didn't explain the crimes yet. Catherine and I ran off and got married, Luke went on. For 6 months we were happy, even though money was tight. I worked as a clerk in a small law firm, and she kept sewing. We were poor but hopeful. His voice dropped low. Catherine died in childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. We had no money for a good doctor, and my pride kept me from asking my family for help. They died in a run-down room because I was too stubborn. Emma felt tears in her eyes as she understood the grief and guilt behind Luke's choices. After Catherine died, I lost it, Luke admitted. Blamed my dad, society, everyone but me. Decided if the world punished me for following my heart, I'd punish it back. Started robbing banks, hitting places that stood for everything I hated about money and status. The story was coming together, but Emma struggled to match the criminal he described with the kind man who saved her. What made you stop? She asked. Luke gave a bitter smile. Got shot in the last robbery. Barely got out of town alive. Hid in an old cabin for 3 months while the wound healed. Had time to think about what I'd become, what Catherine would think of me. Realized I wasn't honoring her. I was destroying everything she loved about me. He waved at the mountains around them. Came up here to disappear, to be someone new. Spent years expecting bounty hunters, but Lucas Carrington was thought dead. Luke Carver could start over, try to make up for past mistakes. Emma took this in quietly, her mind spinning. The man she married was a criminal, but also someone who'd spent 15 years trying to be better. The question was whether that was enough for a marriage, and if the law would let them live in peace. I need to know, Emma said carefully. Have you been paying back the banks you robbed? Is that what the letters from Boston are about? Luke nodded. Every cent I took plus extra. My dad's been helping, sending the money through. His firm. The account's almost settled. 2 more years, and everyone I hurt will be paid back. Emma looked at her husband's weathered face, seeing both the man she loved and the criminal whose past could ruin them. What now, Luke? That poster's up in town. Someone will recognize you soon. Luke's face turned firm. Now I pack. Up and disappear before I bring trouble to you. I should have told you from the start, given you the choice of tying your life to a wanted man. Emma stood suddenly, anger cutting through her fear. Don't you dare decide that for me, Lucas. Carrington, I married you for better or worse, and I meant it, even if it was quick. We'll figure this out together or not at all. Luke looked at her with hope fighting despair. Emma, you don't get it. If they catch me, if bounty hunters come, then we'll deal with it. Emma cut in firmly. But I won't let you run off into the mountains again. Not when we've built something real. Whatever your past, you're not that bank robber anymore. And I'm not the helpless woman from Cedar Falls. We're partners now, and partners don't ditch each other when things get tough. Luke rose, slowly studying her determined face. You know what you're saying? If you stay with me, you could be seen as helping a criminal. Your reputation, your safety, everything you've built here. Everything I've built is with you, Emma said strongly. And I choose to keep building whatever the risks. But Luke, no more secrets. If we're facing this together, I need the whole truth. No hidden letters, no half-stories. Total honesty, or this marriage won't last. Luke nodded slowly, seeing she was offering something rare, not just forgiveness, but true partnership in whatever came next. The question was whether their love could survive the trouble headed their way. The warning came at dawn from an unlikely source. Old Pete Jameson, the town drunk, who got sober just long enough to ride hard into the mountains, with news that could save their lives. Emma heard his horse stumbling up the rocky trail before. She saw Pete swaying in the saddle and calling Luke's name with desperate urgency. "Luke! Luke Carver!" Pete's voice broke with exhaustion and fear. "They're coming for you, boy. 3 mean guys rode into town yesterday asking questions, and they know that wanted poster better than the Bible." Luke stepped out of their rebuilt cabin, rifle in hand and instantly alert. For 2 months since Emma learned his real name, they'd lived knowing his past might catch up. Now it had. "Who's coming, Pete?" Luke asked, helping the old man off his shaky horse. "What do they look like?" Pete took the coffee Emma handed him, his hands trembling. "Bounty hunters for sure. The leader's a big guy, mean-looking, with a scar from his left eye to his jaw, calls himself Morrison. The other 2 look like they'd robbed their own mom. For coins." Emma felt a chill. Morrison. That was Catherine's last name, Luke's first wife who died in childbirth. Could this be a relative out for personal revenge, not just money? Luke's face turned hard at the name. Did he say why he's after Lucas Carrington? Just the reward? "That's the thing," Pete said, his voice low. "He's not asking about Lucas Carrington. He's asking about the guy who killed his sister 20 years ago. Says he's been tracking you across the territory, waiting for you to show up somewhere you can't run." Luke's rifle, which he'd kept perfect for 15 years, seemed heavier in his hands. This wasn't just about old bank robberies anymore. It was about family honor and revenge, the kind that wouldn't stop for legal justice or money. "Catherine Morrison," Luke said quietly, the name heavy with old grief. "She had a brother, James. He was 16 when she died. Blamed me for taking her from their family. Said I killed her as sure as if I'd shot her." Emma saw the pieces fall into place with awful clarity. "He's been hunting you all these years, not for money, but for revenge. 20 years is a long time to hold that kind of hate." "Some wounds don't heal," Luke said, his gray eyes scanning the trees. "For danger, especially when you lose your only family." Pete finished his coffee and stood shakily. "They were asking about trails to your place. How many people live here, if you've got family? Tom Bradley didn't tell them anything, but others in town might talk for money." Emma's hand went to the pistol Luke had taught her to carry at her back. The gun felt strange, but she'd gotten good with it over months of preparing for this kind of threat. "How much time do we have?" Luke asked, moving to their supply stash. "They left town after midnight," Pete said. "But they're waiting for better light to come up the mountain. Maybe 4 hours, 6 if they're careful." Luke and Emma moved like a team who'd practiced this before. Their go bag had survival gear, ammo, dried food, medical supplies, and enough gold to start over in Canada or Mexico if needed. But Emma didn't want to leave the life they'd built here. "We could run," she said, as Luke checked his rifle. Again. "Take the horses, head for Canada, start over somewhere else." Luke stopped, looking at her with those sharp eyes. "Is that what you want, Emma? Another fresh start? New names? Always watching our backs?" Emma thought about their rebuilt cabin, the garden she'd planted, the life they'd made from nothing but hope and love. Running meant losing all that, becoming real fugitives. "No," she said firmly. "I'm done running from other people's mistakes. Yours, Roland Hutchins, my sister's. I've spent my life dealing with others' choices. This time, I want to choose." Luke set down his rifle and took her hands. "Emma, James Morrison isn't here for justice or money. He wants blood. If we stay and fight, one of us might not make it. You ready for that?" Emma looked at their mountain home, the cabin walls they'd built together, the stone foundation that stood for commitment, the life they'd created. "I'm ready to fight for what's ours," she said steadily. "This is our home, Luke. If James Morrison wants to take it, he'll have to go through me." Luke's smile was fierce and proud. "Then, Mrs. Carver, let's give these bounty hunters a proper mountain welcome." The next few hours were all about getting ready. Luke set up defenses around their clearing, logs to force attackers to walk, stones for cover, escape routes to the forest if needed. Emma loaded weapons with steady hands, despite the fear pumping through her. The shy teacher who'd fainted at a kid's scraped knee was gone, replaced by a woman ready to fight beside her outlaw husband. "Remember," Luke said, showing her the best spots to watch and shoot. James Morrison's driven by 20 years of grief and hate. That makes him dangerous but predictable. He'll want to get close, see my face when he kills me. That's our edge if we use it smart. Emma nodded, taking in the tactics like she used to plan lessons. What about the other two? The ones who look like hired killers. Professional bounty hunters want their reward alive if they can, dead if they have to, Luke said. They'll be careful. Let Morrison take the emotional risks while they wait for clear shots. As the sun rose higher, they took spots in the cabin to watch the trails while staying hidden. Luke's rifle covered the main path, while Emma watched the back with her shotgun, chosen for its power at close range and its scary sound. Emma, Luke said in a quiet moment as they waited, whatever happens today, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me something I thought I'd lost when Catherine died. The belief I could be worth someone's love. Emma squeezed his hand. You are worth it, Luke. Not because you're making up for your past, but because of who you choose. To be every day. James Morrison's wrong about you. You didn't kill his sister. Poverty and bad medical care did, along with a system that made help impossible for poor families. Luke's face softened with gratitude, but before he could answer, horses announced their enemy's arrival. 3 riders came out of the trees, moving carefully, ready for trouble. The leader fit Pete's description, a big man with a scar, from eye to jaw, his eyes burning with 20 years of hate. James Morrison had grown from the grieving 16-year-old Luke knew into something harder, shaped by years of wanting revenge. "Lucas Carrington!" Morrison shouted across the clearing. "I know you're in there. 20 years I've been looking for you, following dead ends. Now I found you, and it's time to pay for what you did to my sister." Luke stood slowly in the cabin doorway, rifle ready. "Hello, James. You've grown since I last saw you." Morrison's scarred face twisted with anger. "Don't talk to me like we're buddies. You killed Catherine, took her from our family, got her pregnant, and let her die in poverty because you were too proud to ask for help." Emma watched, her finger light on her shotgun's trigger. The other 2 bounty hunters spread out to surround them, but they let Morrison take the lead in this personal fight. "You're right," Luke said, his voice calm but strong. "I was too proud, too young, too dumb to put Catherine's needs before my hurt feelings. She died because of my choices, and I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of her memory." Morrison roared with rage, charging his horse forward, shooting wildly as grief took over. Luke's shot was careful, hitting Morrison's shoulder and knocking him off his horse. Emma's shotgun blasted from the side window, aimed at the second bounty hunter circling behind. The shotgun's spread didn't need perfect aim, and its loud boom sent the man's horse rearing in panic. 2 down, 1 to go, Luke called, reloading smoothly. "Stay down, Emma. The third one's smart, waiting for a clean shot." Emma crouched below the window, heart pounding as she reloaded her shotgun. The shy teacher was gone, replaced by a woman who could act under fire because her husband's life was on the line. Morrison was cursing from behind a log, his wounded shoulder making his aim shaky, but his voice still full of hate. "Think you can hide behind your wife forever, Carrington? Come out and face me like a man." "I'm not hiding," Luke answered steadily. "But I'm not making it easy for you to collect that bounty either." Catherine believed in forgiveness, in second chances. Morrison fired another wild shot, splintering wood near Luke. "Don't you dare say her name. You lost that right when you let her die in that dirty tenement." Emma peeked out and saw the 3rd bounty hunter, a lean, professional-looking man in the trees with a rifle, waiting patiently for a shot. Unlike Morrison, he wasn't driven by revenge, just doing a job, which made him more dangerous. "Luke," Emma whispered, "the rifle guy's got a clear shot at the door if you move." Luke nodded, seeing their situation. They were trapped in their own cabin with 2 wounded enemies and a 3rd waiting for them to slip up. Then Emma remembered the trap door Luke had built into the cabin floor, leading to a root cellar with a hidden exit in the brush. "The root cellar?" she whispered. "I can circle around, get behind the rifle guy." Luke looked worried. "Emma, no. Too dangerous. If something goes wrong, if we stay stuck here, we're dead anyway." Emma cut in, checking her shotgun. "That rifle guy won't get impatient like Morrison. He'll wait us out." Luke studied her determined face, seeing not the helpless bride, but a brave woman. Stay low. Move fast. Don't take risks you don't need to. If you get in trouble, run. I'll come for you. Emma squeezed his hand, then dropped through the trap door into the dark root cellar. The tunnel Luke had dug was tight, barely wide enough for her, but it led to the hidden exit in the brush. Above, she heard Morrison shouting threats, his voice rough with pain. The second bounty hunter had gotten back on his horse, helping the rifle guys slow siege. Emma came out of the tunnel into thick bushes, her heart racing as she moved silently toward the rifleman's spot, using every trick Luke taught her about moving quietly in the wild. Through the trees, she saw the bounty hunter, rifle aimed at the cabin door with steady patience. He was good, positioned with cover and clear shots far enough to avoid crossfire. Emma got closer, her shotgun heavy, sweat making her grip slippery. She'd never shot a person, wasn't sure she could, but thinking of Luke, their life, their future, she found her resolve. The bounty hunter turned at her sound, his rifle swinging toward her. But Emma was ready, firing her shotgun first, hitting his leg and sending him tumbling with a cry. "Emma!" Luke called, relief and worry in his voice. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she shouted, moving to a new spot like Luke taught her. "Never stay where you shot from." The wounded rifleman was cursing, still dangerous with his shooting arm working. Then more horses came, and Emma's heart sank, thinking more bounty hunters had found them. But a voice rang out with real authority. "This is Marshal Tom Patterson. Territorial law enforcement. Drop your weapons and say who you are." Emma peeked and saw 3 riders with marshal badges. The leader was an older man, weathered from years of keeping order in the frontier. James Morrison fired wildly at the marshals, his rage making surrender impossible. "Stay out of this. Carrington killed my sister, and I'll see justice done." Marshal Patterson's voice was calm, but firm. "Mr. Morrison, you're wanted for illegal bounty hunting and 2 civilian deaths. Drop your gun and give up peacefully." Luke stepped out of the cabin slowly, hands visible but holding his rifle. "Marshal Patterson, I'm Lucas Carrington. I assume you're here about the bank robberies from 20 years ago." "Among other things," the marshal said, getting off his horse carefully, weapon ready. "We've been tracking Morrison and his men for 6 months. They're not real bounty hunters. They're criminals using old posters to justify robbery and murder." Emma felt hope mixed with confusion. If Morrison's crew weren't legit, what did that mean for Luke's status? The wounded rifleman tried to shoot the marshals from his hiding spot. Emma's second shotgun blast stopped him for good, the man slumping silently. Marshal Patterson nodded at her. "Nice shooting, ma'am. Bounty hunters don't usually bring their wives to gunfights." "We're not bounty hunters," Luke said firmly. "I'm a former outlaw trying to make up for old crimes. Emma's my wife, and we were defending our home." The second bounty hunter, hurt by Emma's first shot, tried to run for his horse. Luke's rifle fired once, stopping him before he could escape or threaten the marshals. "That leaves Morrison," Patterson said, scanning the clearing. "James, you're surrounded and outgunned. Your men are dead or down. Give up now, and you'll live to face trial." Morrison howled in rage, his 20 years of hate ending in this moment. He couldn't let go of his revenge. He charged from cover, shooting wildly at Luke. Luke could have killed him easily. Morrison's aim was off, his emotions a mess. Instead, Luke fired once, shattering Morrison's gun hand, stopping him without killing. Morrison fell to his knees, clutching his hand, crying in pain and defeat. 20 years of hate had led to this broken moment. Marshal Patterson approached Morrison carefully, checking for weapons and bandaging his wounds. "James Morrison, you're under arrest for murder, robbery, and pretending to be federal officers. You'll face trial in territorial court." Emma stepped out of the forest, shotgun pointed safely down. The abandoned bride was gone, replaced by a frontier woman who'd fought beside her husband and helped catch criminals. "Mr. Carrington," Marshal Patterson said, "we need to talk about your legal status. There's been some news about those old robbery charges." Luke looked tired but hopeful. "What kind of news?" "The kind involving presidential pardons and recognition of your payback efforts," Patterson said with a small smile. "Your dad's law firm's been working for you more than you knew. "You're not a wanted man anymore, Luke. You're a citizen who's paid his debt." Emma felt tears of relief as the news sank in. They were free to build their life without fear of bounty hunters or jail. The badge of honor Marshall Patterson gave Luke was more than official. It stood for everything they'd built, fought for, and could now look forward to as true partners. 6 months later, morning sun lit up their bigger cabin, shining on the Ake family Bible open on Emma's kitchen table. The book was her grandmother's, sent west with other treasures after her family heard about her marriage. Now it held their new life story, its margins filled with notes of births, marriages, and milestones in their mountain home. Emma's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly as she read the morning passage, a habit she'd started since, learning she was pregnant 3 weeks ago. Their child would grow up in a world of love and security neither she nor Luke had dared hope for early on. Luke came in from morning chores, moving with the ease of a man who'd found his place. The bow, deputy sheriff's badge he wore was more than redemption. It showed his shift from running from his past to building a better future for their community. "Morning, Mrs. Carver," he said, kissing her forehead with the gentle warmth that had replaced their early carefulness. "How you feeling today?" "Better," Emma said, closing the Bible and starting breakfast. "The morning sickness is fading, and I'm actually hungry for the first time in weeks." Luke's smile was warm as he watched her move around their kitchen with ease. The shy teacher who answered Roland Hutchins' ad had become a remarkable woman, teaching wilderness, skills to kids and hosting community gatherings in their mountain home. Their cabin had grown beyond their first plans. The main room had a proper fireplace with Luke's expert stonework, cozy furniture from local wood, and windows framing mountain views like paintings. A bedroom gave privacy, and Emma's small. Study held her growing book collection and letters tying them to the world. "Marshall Patterson sent word yesterday," Luke said over breakfast. "The territorial governor wants to expand the deputy sheriff program to cover more remote towns. He offered me a permanent job overseeing the whole mountain district." Emma looked up from her coffee, studying his face. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd talk to my wife first," Luke said with a smile. "This affects us both, Emma. If I take it, it means more travel, time away from home, and responsibility for keeping peace in places. Where law's far off." Emma thought it over. Luke's deputy work had already helped their community, settling fights, tracking criminals, being a fair voice where might often ruled. "You like the work," she said, "and you're good at it. People trust you, respect your judgment, look to you for leadership." Luke nodded. "It's weird finding purpose in upholding laws I once broke, but it feels good using my old skills to protect folks from criminals, like I used to be." Emma took his hand. "Then we'll make it work. This community needs you, Luke, and our child will grow up proud of a dad who stands for justice." Their talk was cut off by horses approaching, not the frantic sound of bounty hunters, but the easy pace of friends visiting. Through the window, Emma saw Tom Bradley and his wife Sarah, Doc Peterson, and other Cedar Falls families. "What's this about?" Emma asked, but Luke's knowing smile said he expected them. The group filled their main room with warmth and laughter, kids playing and talk flowing like old friends. Sarah Bradley stood to speak, looking happy. "We came to share news," Sarah said. "The church council approved a real congregation in Cedar Falls. We'll have a church building in a year, and we need someone to guide our community's morals and spirit." She looked at Emma. "We'd like you to be our teacher and church organist, Emma. Your education and experience make you perfect, and we can't think of anyone better to shape our kids' hearts and minds." Emma felt a rush of emotion at being valued beyond just Luke's wife. These people were offering her a chance to use her skills for something bigger, the kind of work she'd always wanted. "The job comes with a real salary," Tom Bradley added. "Enough to make the weekly trip from your mountain worth it, with a place to stay in town when weather's bad." Luke squeezed her hand. "Your call, Emma." Emma looked at the faces of people who'd once judged their quick marriage, but now saw her and Luke as part of their community. The abandoned bride from the church steps had found a husband, a home, and a purpose she'd never imagined. "I accept," she said simply, and the room burst into happy cheers. As the afternoon went on and their guests left, Emma and Luke stood on their cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, the same colors from their first meeting, now promising more happiness for their growing family. "Ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "Giving up your quiet mountain life for marriage and community stuff?" Luke pulled her close, his voice warm. "I told you once I didn't remember women being this beautiful. I was wrong, Emma. It wasn't just beauty. It was finding someone who saw the man I'm trying to be, not just the man I was." Emma leaned into his hug, feeling their child move, and knowing their story was just starting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and chances to build something lasting in this wild mountain home. But tonight, as stars came out in the dark sky, above their peaceful valley, Emma and Luke Carver stood together as true partners. Two people who'd found in each other the courage to be more than they'd ever dreamed.